Good evening, my dear friends. I hope you're all doing very well. Today we're going to be learning the 4th chapter in Rambam in the laws of Shabbat. So over here the Rambam starts to discuss the laws of cooking on Shabbat, as we have already started to discuss yesterday a little bit, and now we're start getting involved into the details. So the Rambam says that since we're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, what is the case in regards to covering a pot that is on the fire on Shabbat? In other words, like this. We have a pot that is hot, and now you want to preserve the heat that was on this pot, that was on the fire. Now it's not on the fire anymore, and you want to make sure that the pot will stay hot for your dinner in a few hours, or maybe for tomorrow, if it's Friday night or Shabbat day. So, in what case are you allowed to cover the pot? In what case are you not allowed to cover the pot? So this is what the Rambam is going to be discussing today. So, first of all, there is a big distinction. There are substances where these substances are, if you cover something with them, they will not only preserve the heat, but they will actually add more heat. They will raise its temperature. For instance, he says, if we use salt or lime or sand, all of these are very strong substances that if you cover something, it will actually raise the temperature of the thing that is covered. So if we have our pot of food and we cover it with sand, and it starts off at a certain degree of heat, it might actually go up. So therefore, since we're not allowed to cook on Shabbat, so therefore we're not allowed to do that. Now, there is another type of substance, which is that it's a substance that doesn't add heat, it only preserves the heat. For instance, he says, fabric or grass, grape skins, pigeon feathers, sawdust, all of these, they will preserve the heat, but they won't actually add more heat. The temperature won't go higher. So therefore, technically speaking, this latter one, the one that doesn't actually add heat, should be okay to use on Shabbat. But the truth is that the rabbi said that you are actually not allowed to do neither, definitely not the one that adds temperature, and also even the one that only preserves the heat, we're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Because, again, the rabbis were worried that although this is technically not real cooking, you're just preserving heat, still, a person might come to do the higher form of preservation, which actually adds temperature, which is similar to cooking, although it's not actual cooking because there is no fire involved, but it's close enough to be like cooking. Now, if it is Friday afternoon, and it's before Shabbat, and now you want to make sure that your pot is going to stay hot, so the substances that are adding heat, for instance, as we said before, salt or sand, these substances we're not allowed to cover our pots in. The reason being is that if it's still on the fire at that point, and now it's going to start bubbling while it's covered, and it might continue bubbling on Shabbat, you might uncover it from its state of being covered in order that the heat should go down. And if so, you will cover it afterwards in order to preserve the heat once it's cooled down a little bit, and now then, that's going to be similar to actual cooking. But if it's only to preserve the heat, so then if we cover the pot before Shabbat begins, so then that's okay. So we're allowed to take pigeon feathers, as the Rambam says, or garments, or fabrics, take a blanket, put it on top before Shabbat begins to preserve the heat. But once Shabbat begins, and then you take the food to eat it, now you're not allowed to cover it back, because the same idea. we don't want to come to a case to put on another substance. But if we're talking about something which is cold, something which is, we're not trying to preserve its heat, we're just making sure that it shouldn't freeze. So this is the opposite end of the spectrum. In such a case, it's okay. Because we're not cooking at all. It's nothing to do with cooking. We're just trying to make sure that it shouldn't get too cold. Or we're trying to warm it up somewhat, that it should, from its very cold state. So then, in such case, it would be okay. Now, what if it's a case where we're not sure if it's sundown or not sundown? So, it is okay. If a person is not sure if it's already sundown or not, but there's still some light outside, so then they would be allowed to cover their hot food. And so actually the Rambam says, and I was actually wrong in what I said earlier, just want to fix that. The Rambam says that if we have already uncovered the food, and now we've eaten from it, or we've taken food from it, we are now allowed to cover it back with the substance that doesn't add heat, because it's not adding any heat, and you're just putting back its cover on top of what it was before. Now all of this is all in a case when we're talking about the original vessel, the original pot, or whatever vessel that was used for the food when it was cooked, which is called the first vessel. Now, so all of these cases will deal of what we've discussed is all in regards to that case. But if we have a case where you've taken, let's say it's a hot soup or a hot stew, and you pour it from the first pot into a new pot, which was cold, it wasn't the pot that you've used to cook it up in. Now you're allowed to cover that second pot, because since it's in a second vessel, so now we're not worried about the preservation of the temperatures, or that it's going to be similar to cooking, because it's not in the original vessel anymore. And the Rambam continues on to another similar aspect, and with this he actually pretty much completes the chapter. It's a short chapter today. He says that one is allowed to place one metal pot on top of another metal pot. So in other words, if we have one metal pot, which is hot, and now you have another second pot, which you want to put on top of it in order to preserve the heat of the bottom one, and you put it on top, that is something which you're allowed to do. Or to put an earthenware pot or something like that, that's something which would be permissible. But if the bottom pot is so hot that if you have cold food in the top pot, it's going to heat them up to a place that that you'll get burnt by touching it. In other words, the heat of the bottom pot is so strong that it's going to be able to literally cook up what's on top. So then that's something which we're not allowed to do. And so that is the chapter for today. So it's actually a very short chapter. And we're pretty much done the chapter for today. And God willing, tomorrow we will continue with the next one. So we're now learning the laws of cooking of Shabbat, and we've learned what is allowed to be covered and what is not allowed to be covered when we're talking about hot food. All the best. We will see you.